Welcome. Thank you in advance, Victor and Kim, for the tents. We watched a Disney thing on Yosemite and got to see bears and things like that, so we'll see how they come back. I'm out of breath all of a sudden. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, here we go. Good morning to everyone here, and especially those online. We are continuing our study this summer, the whole congregation of basics, and today we're discussing the concept of fellowship. And turn to Acts 2. That's the outline, I believe, that the material is using to decide on some topics. I've often wondered what it would have been like to be in Jerusalem on Pentecost and to be there when hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, totaling 3,000 on a single day, chose to follow Christ for the rest of their life. I think it would have been pretty exciting. I'd be curious to know how they immersed them. Did they just have them go into a big lake and say, okay, go down? Or was it individual? Just the mechanics of it is quite an amazing thing. But what we also know is they came from many places and they stayed, many of them, for a few days. And so some things occurred that set a pattern for, I believe, us to emulate. And that's where we're headed this morning. Verse 42 of Acts chapter 2, we're looking at aspects of this longer paragraph. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, and that's what we talked about last week, and to the fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. Guess what? The next 2 weeks we'll study. Breaking of bread and prayer. That's the next two subject matters. And in that environment, everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. We'll discuss that as well in coming weeks. All believers were together and had everything in common. And so verse 42 and verse 44 serve as bookmarks, if you will, to give us ideas about the idea of fellowship, koinonia. Koinonia has behind it the idea of having things in common. And let's think for a moment of things that we have in common. And I don't want you to mention, and I do want you to participate. Many of those who are good to participate are in the two small groups in other parts of the building. So feel free to speak up. But what are some things we have in common that have nothing to do with spiritual things? Because we don't always acknowledge that. Mark, what do we have in common? We're American citizens. Physically, what do we have in common? Human beings, created by God. Today, we're sitting in a common place, which has much associated with it because we come with common beliefs and things that the spiritual conversations will tell us. Did anybody eat breakfast this morning? So we're going to close the class, and John Orr, in putting the material together, I liked the way that he encourages us to close this study. It's something I will add to my notes in coming years. But we have much in common physically. Where we live, how we live, the things we do physically. Any of you have sports allegiances? Anybody like sports teams? You have that in common. And what is it that you do when you get together? You'll talk about that. Either they're winning or they're not. They lost a close game or they blew someone out. Whatever sport it is, whatever musical group you like. We don't always acknowledge koinonia is so much a part of our humanity. And it's things that we have to talk about when we're together. And again, we'll close with an interesting exercise, and I like the approach that is made. What is it that we have in common in the spiritual realm? Terry? Christ. And what did Christ do for us? And he did that for others sitting here. And he has that same meaning for others sitting here. You have that in common. And as we have said before, Charles Hodge, stick with those you're stuck with. We bear up one to another, but we encourage one another. We edify one another. What if you were to make a list in reading a typical church bulletin or news online, and you see we're having a church fellowship Sunday after worship, what are we talking about? Food. It's amazing, and it's to our discredit, that we think of fellowship meals as the main thing. And by the way, we do like to eat, don't we? And we encourage people to stay, to have that in common. And let us use that, having that in common, because you're in here having something in common. And we find out we're members of the body of Christ in common. We have much to talk about and much to celebrate. It's a big deal to have koinonia with people. And how many of you have traveled and you go to a location you've never been? You've planned ahead. Some of you did this last week. I helped you find the location of a building. And you walk in and you leave and you think, well, I've just met brothers and sisters I've never met before, but they're brothers and sisters in Christ. And there was an immediate connection with them. You felt at home. You felt accepted. You enjoyed your time with them because of what you have in common, spiritually speaking, because of the church for which Christ died. Koinonia is a big deal. Terry and I have said it, and we've moved a few times, but we've said, I don't know how people move with jobs or whatever reason, how they move to a new location without having a church family to help them to assimilate into the community. How do you find out where the good dentist is? We have to depend on each other coming into a congregation in another state, sometimes country. How do they survive? And I surmise it's difficult. It's not as easy. It doesn't happen as quickly without having a group with which there's things in common and you trust their evaluations or recommendations. When you need car repair, it's great to know the ones that you can trust. I mean, the list goes on and on. The value of having things in common with people and the trust and certainty that can be there. Your observations. And how many of you are hungry because we mentioned food? We have that in common too. Add anything before we move forward? Koinonia, fellowship. Turn to Acts 10. The way we usually apply this verse is not incorrect, but it's short-sighted. It's addressing the negative unnecessarily in the midst of some very strong positive observations. Hebrews 10, verse 24. He's just talked about the things we have in confidence to go to the throne of God. We draw near to Him, guilt-free conscience. All the things that the writer describes for us. In verse 24, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. What does that mean? Those of you who grew up watching Westerns on TV, what is a spur? What's a spur? It's a motivation. There you go. Good. Well said, John. It's a motivation for a horse worn on the boot of the rider. And he spurs the side of the horse to Hebrews 10:24 or 25, I guess we read. So it's a motivation for the horse, and the spur, I'm not sure if it's still a common thing for those who ride horses, but it's a motivation to encourage people, to spur them on. It's a very specific word. To spur them on toward what? Look at the verse. Love and good deeds. That's one of the things we do today, right? We come together in fellowship, and we tend to forget these comments because we point the finger and say, don't forsake the assembly. Don't forsake the assembly. And it's in the verse. Don't neglect the meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. Some 50 years after Christ left earth, so close to Calvary and that already lost the sense of urgency or need for coming together for corporate worship. I acknowledge those verses, but I want us to see in discussing fellowship, one of the reasons we come together is to spur one another on toward love, agape, God's will acted out toward other people is the way I describe it. Do you plan to do that today? Mask stop some of the hugging that congregations have done in the past. I'm glad we're getting back to it. If you're not familiar with that, a smile, a handshake, a touching of the elbow, there's a side hug. Spurring people on because of what we have in common. And what is it? Love for each other. A love for God, Christ. And it's a motivation. And we can make strong statements like we need to meet together, and you have things to do when you're here. We don't sometimes say. I share a story. In South Florida, we had a member that came out of the discipling group, and he would be red hot for Christ for several months, and then he would disappear. And as he would begin to make his way back to the fellowships and discussions and other things with the congregation, he said, Gary, I didn't have anybody contact me while I was away. And I said, wait a minute now, I know that. And I made a list of 3 or 4 that I knew had. He says, well, yeah, but what about the other 340? I didn't let him go there. I said, who did you contact? You are a member of this congregation. Who did you send a card to? Who did you call on the telephone? You have an obligation to be here to do that and to receive that. And you have an obligation when you're having the self-pity of how no one missed me, and of course some did, and others maybe not, but they were probably contacting another person who was in need of encouragement. You have a responsibility. And did you fulfill it by not coming or by not reaching out? It works both ways as members of a congregation. Let us consider an accounting term, give thought to it, figure this thing out. What will I do today? I'm going to spur people on toward love and toward good deeds. And of course, one of those good deeds is spurring someone on in love. It's the first of the list. And we come together and celebrate the things we have in common and who we are and the way we spend our week and the things we do for the cause of Christ. And we discuss it. We might problem solve. We certainly deal with those heavy issues. And let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. And that's sincere. It's necessary teaching. It needs to be understood that we need to be in the assembly when able. But then it says, but let us encourage. And again, it's a responsibility of things we have in common, of the people in which commonality is found. Encourage them. How many of you can use that from time to time? Do you know eternal optimists? There are people in the world like that. They're eternal optimists. I'm a pragmatic optimist. I see things as they really are, and then I find optimism. I find good about it. But I try to see things as they really are. But some people are eternal optimists, and they're always smiling, and they're always encouraging you somehow. And again, because of what we have in common, because we come to a common place, and it's a meeting place to encourage others and talk about the good works that we get to do as members of that church family. All of those are active, emotional, social actions on our part toward each other. And when does it increase? What does the verse say? The last part of that verse. Especially do it when? As you see the day, and this is Judgment Day, final day, as you see the day, capital D in the NIV, approaching. By the way, is Judgment Day today? Possibly. Very possible. We don't have an exact date. So each day would encourage us to act as if it could come today. And what do I want to say if it's the last day of my life to brothers and sisters in Christ that I have so much in common with, and I don't want any regrets in case this is the last time that I get to be with them and talk to them. Should something happen later in the day, that brings the day into their circumstances. Doesn't have to be a universal judgment day. We could be moments away from our judgment day. And by that I'm simply saying that it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. And we can't undo or do things once we leave this body and soul from this place. Again, observation. If you don't say anything, I'm going to think that you totally agree with me, and that's not a good feeling sometimes. John?
You say that as you see the day approaching, you think we'll be able to see anticipate it, see it coming?
I don't think in that way, but I think when we realize that it can be the day for any person should they die today, then remember, eternity is not measured in time. So once I leave time, it's there. I'm there, though it's Abraham's bosom, until Christ comes. I think it's just living with an awareness of opportunity rather than obligation. I tend to use that word more, but it is an obligation. But I would like to think that we would come together and choose to be loving and share good deeds, that we would choose these things rather than doing it out of obligation or duty. That's maturity, by the way. To do it out of opportunity and maturity. Terry?
Even if it's 10 years from now, today it's closer than it was yesterday.
We don't know when our life will end. I've had two things happen when I was younger, a young adult. A gentleman led a closing prayer at the Brainerd congregation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we observed his funeral on Saturday. That's when it struck me he led the dismissal prayer, and he had a sudden illness, death, whatever, and I'm not remembering what caused it. And because of circumstances, the funeral was pretty quick. And you were announcing on Sunday his death for those who may not have gotten the news, and it made you really come face to face with our mortality. My dad had a group of people with Mom over at their house on a Sunday night. The next morning at 1:15 in the morning, he passed away. The funeral was on Wednesday, and at the congregation where they'd worshiped for many years, they announced, "We're so sorry if you haven't heard, but the memorial service was this morning for Bill," and some had not got the word. They were out of town. They had just missed the information, and it reminds you of the uncertainty. And Terry and I say it often when hurricanes, tornadoes, natural disasters, be ready. Just be ready. And whatever happens will happen. We may not have control, but be ready should it happen. That's the best we can do. It's the best we can do as Christians. Be ready should that occur. And it lets us say when we get that news, another one's made it because they were ready and they lived with an awareness of the day in their life because of the fellowship they shared. Turn to 1 John 1. This is an interesting verse. Again, it fits in the conversation of the things we have in common. Certainly the word fellowship is part of the verse. But if we claim, 1 John 1:6, if we claim to have fellowship with him, yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live by the truth. So there's the letters written against Gnosticism, and the Gnostics made certain claims for themselves, and they claimed perfection in their life, saying that they had such a relationship with spiritual matters that I don't see in, and he deals with that here. But if we make a claim to have fellowship with him, something needs to be a part of that. It's a proof text in many ways. If I claim to have fellowship with him yet walk in darkness, and the idea is I live habitually on the dark side compared to light and darkness, sin and walking with Christ, then we lie and don't live by the truth. So there's a claim there that has to be measured against our life walk. And if we, verse 8, if we claim to be without sin, he is faithful. If we claim to be without sin, verse 8, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. But again, it's against the claim of spirituality and a relationship with Christ. The word is used in verse 7, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. We have that koinonia. We each walk in the light. We walk with an awareness of light. We walk not afraid of light. We walk, as he suggests in the book, that we're not at all running from an awareness of being watched in our life. We walk in the light as he is in the light. And we have that fellowship with one another. Have you ever had trouble forgiving someone even though they've asked for it? One of the first lessons that I preached here is, what is our greatest need? What is our greatest need? Forgiveness. It's forgiveness. And yet I've had to sit in a church office occasionally, not often, I'm thankful, but maybe it's because I choose to bring the subject up in the larger audience. Why would I refuse to forgive someone that God has forgiven? How can that ever occur? Is he going to be less difficult or more difficult? Or by us not being forgiven towards someone that's asked God for forgiveness, are we saying he was too easy? Or I can't forgive? And the reason it's a worthy subject matter is because we will be forgiven at judgment based on how we forgive on earth. And how can we not be forgiving to other people? And if they walk in darkness but come back to the light, the context of this first chapter, and walk in the light as he is in the light, again, it's implied in several inferences, then it's inherent upon us to be forgiven to them. Be forgiving as God has forgiven them. But we have fellowship. We have fellowship with them twice, verse 6, verse 7, as we follow the word and seek to apply it, if you will. Look at James 5. Again, it's an interesting approach from others. It might not be something that we have seen quickly, but it's very much a part of what's being said. James 5, beginning at verse 16. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it might not rain, that it would not rain, and it did not rain for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its fruits or crops. My brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring him back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner away from his error will save him from death, and that spiritual death, and cover over a multitude of sins. John Orr suggests in his putting together this material that these verses would suggest one of the fruits, or some of the fruits of fellowship, of being in fellowship with Christ, of sharing this fellowship with each other and encouraging this to occur among us. The confessing of sin among us, of praying for each other. It's part of fellowship. It's things we have in common. Knowing that the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective, and as if we didn't know that was true, we have an example as a proof text. Elijah serves as an example, if you will, to us. But it's part of the fruit of fellowship. That we're able to do this one for the other. Observations? Agree, disagree, add to? You're too easy on me today. Let me go to, and we don't need the rest of the time, but we'll come back if the practice that John Orr suggests creates some thought on our part. He used the acronym of HOPES, H-O-P-E-S, to give us ideas of how to meet people, of how to meet and greet people. Our goal is to pray and reach those who are looking for God. And this study is to hopefully help us know what we believe and be ready to teach it to others as September comes and goes. And in that light, when people come to visit, what do you say? What would make it comfortable? Well, he uses HOPES to give us idea. The first one, H, home. Where are you from? Where are you from? How long can we talk about that sometimes? Where are you from? Where were you raised? Do you live close by? It gives you an easy topic to begin having what? Something in common. Something in common. And where are you from? When we were in China, the first thing our students would say to us, have you had your breakfast? It was, they knew the English, and it gave them something to say as they would want to greet us. Have you had your breakfast? We tend to say in our household, did you sleep well? Did you have a good night's rest? And hold your breath if it, or just look for a longer day if it wasn't a restful night. And it's a preparation for each of us, I suppose. Something in common. And where are you from? How many of you could answer the question, what is your home city? Nobody's raising your hand. What is your home city? I find out that a lot of people don't answer where they presently live. And when I see a hesitancy, I say, well, where have you lived most of your life? Because home is Tennessee, Arkansas, Arizona, it's another place. This is just where they came for a period of their life, but it's not really home in their thinking. And we did a survey at West Broward after we'd been there several years. I asked them, tell me where your your hometown is. Where have you spent most of your time where you would call home? And we had 23 states, and yet they worship there in South Florida. It helped me to realize the definition of some people. Where's your home? We tell them which year. Tennessee, Florida, Ohio, 3 times in California, Texas, Oklahoma, China. Which one you asking about? But some people don't move around, and it's an easier answer and a smoother conversation, but you get the point. You establish a common answer, if you will, that leads to other comments. What's your occupation? What's your hobby? Could be a similar principle. What are your hobbies? What do you do? If you sense that they're older, how did you spend much of your life as an occupation? You fit it to their circumstance. It's applying the principle that most people find it easier to talk about themselves. And that's not in a prideful way. You're encouraging them to share something about themselves. And as you're hoping to establish koinonia, you're finding connection points that you can have in common. Again, it's a useful practice. P, preferences. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite sports team? When we tried out at a congregation 23 miles east of Cleveland a number of years ago, I found out later, they hired me that night, but I found out later that they knew I had been a sports writer for 11 years of my life, high school, college, and 7 years full-time, and they surrounded me. Are you Browns fan or Steelers fan? Browns or Steelers? 2 close pro teams in close proximity. I knew they were teasing, but I did not quickly answer because I knew it could be difficult. I said, well, I liked Cleveland when Bernie Kosar was here, but they've had so many misfortunes to lose games in the last minute and a half, so I've found others to also have an allegiance toward, and that sufficed. I showed an appreciation for the Cleveland Browns, 23 miles to their west, and I had nothing to say about the Steelers. Well, one of the deacons' son, at the time I think about 6th grade, spoke up. He was on the peripheral of this small circle of men. He said, I'm a Steelers fan. And his dad turned around. What? Dad, they've won 4 championships since we even got to the championship game. And you can't refute that, but I don't know what kind of conversation they had going home. Koinonia, something in common, and it enhances our conversations wherever we are. What's your favorite food? Do you like Chinese? Do you like Vietnam? Do you like Italian? Do you like, and some of it's somewhat exotic, and there's some exotic foods in towns like the Bay Area. But again, preference, H-O-P, preferences. And then E, entertainment. What do you do for entertainment? We were interviewing on telephone a number of years ago with a congregation outside of Phoenix. And it was a search team of men and women, 4 or 5 together. And I heard a female voice, and she asked, Gary, what's your hobby? I said, well, I used to play tennis. I played golf occasionally. Really, my hobby today is Terry. Terry's my hobby. And she said, I understand. And I probably was given a vote of confidence by her. If I treated my wife that way, and she would hope that her husband would treat her that way. I'm just speculating. What's your hobby? What do you enjoy doing? Entertainment is the word that attaches to the letters, but it's a conversation of establishing koinonia with someone that you've met. And all of those are not less or more important, but it's important that we get to the S, which is spiritual. What's your favorite gospel? It's a non-confronting question to ask in a church building or at a dinner or lunch when you know that you have spiritual things in common. What's your favorite gospel? Do you have a favorite event that you would have liked to have seen in person? You'd like to have been there? And eventually, maybe with conversation, maybe not the first one, you can ask, how's your spiritual life? I read Marvin Bryant, Eric. He's established an enrichment ministry, the minister in San Antonio where Eric was an associate. And he was, for a year and a half, he was our China minister. Sunday night, we would listen to his sermon from the previous week on the internet MP3. But he said, I tend to ask people eventually, how is your standing in Christ? Are you spiritually minded? Questions like that. And eventually, we would want to get to those type of discussions. Maybe not quickly, maybe not the first time, but as we establish koinonia, we can move toward that. I'm going to tell you something I'd never heard before, and I'm not going to give you any hints where or whom, but I had someone in a congregational setting not that long ago, and that's not intended to encourage you to start guessing, but not that long ago, it wasn't like 20 years ago, but discussions were being given about fellowship meals and encourage people to stay and let us get to know you. And she was somewhat new to the congregation, and she says, Gary, I have to tell you, I don't enjoy being around people. So to go to a fellowship meal was difficult for her. And the way she said it would be not so much that I'm an introvert, because I'm an introvert, but it's just difficult for her to be around people. That makes it difficult, but it is a conversation that you can establish other things that you have in common. I'm through, unless you want to add to or take away or comment. I've covered the subject matter in every place that I think can be, so that we will understand our responsibility, but also our opportunity. The opportunity we can have to have things in common with brothers and sisters in Christ. It's important that we are aware of it. It's important that in that awareness we act upon it. We take advantage of opportunities to establish commonality with each other. And we look for opportunity to build each other up. As we have discussions, we're able to discern whether this is a good time or not, because we know their situations of life. We know difficulties that may have just occurred. And the conversation is different when they come back from a funeral of a loved one in the last days. Things we have in common is what we're aiming toward. Ideas, questions? I'll give you back 3 minutes that I'm sure I've taken several Sunday mornings in sermon form. Think specifically about it. Make it something that you're very aware of. The fellowship that we share because of Christ. The things we have in common because of that. Take advantage of opportunities. Thank you.